Hey everybody, it's Dr. Lusheen. Typically, I provide this type of course review every week, but I've been incredibly busy, and I apologize if I haven't been able to respond to some of your emails. It's just this semester, overall, this whole year, I'm working part time as an EHS manager at a company. I'm the regional vice president for Region 5 for ASSP. We've got a regional operations committee meeting occurring next week in Omaha, and I've been trying to get that all finalized. My somewhat new position as the graduate coordinator for the program has taken a lot of time because I had to get in an audit and review report. I just got the draft back to update. I got to get more, and I need to get some more things done with that position. And I've been reviewing applications, and then I'm overloading for classes because we had 2 faculty members leave. So yeah, it's been busy. So again, apologize. I'll try to do this more often, but at least this will cover the first 2 weeks. One thing I really wanted to point out from week 1, and I think a lot of you took this too, is that research it's cyclical. It's not linear. It's like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back at some times. And we've been focusing the previous week on using the UWW library resources and, speaking with the librarian for her assistance, because that's where research springs from. That, and I'll cover here in a little bit, but the big thing is how research is done is you've got a question, and then that question has to be narrowed. And you do that by asking sub-questions or coming up with sub-problems, and then you do a literature search for it and find out what aspects are currently known or answered, which ones are either misunderstood or maybe not fully answered. And then you keep chasing that until you get to the point where it's okay, this is what we know, but I haven't been able to find any published work that has answered this particular question or answered this question in the context or scope in which I'm interested. And that becomes your research problem. And then all the work you've done becomes sort of the background and the setup. And then you just have to start then thinking about what methods should I use that are at my disposal to pursue this. And at this point, I just want to remind everybody, and I stressed this in my earlier intro video, that you're not actually going to do the research. You're only proposing a research study, okay? Because I do think that's the most amount of work. If you do that right, then the rest is fairly easy, though data collection never happens as you plan. So planning, study, and literature review is the most important aspect, and that's why you've been practicing it. And I have been providing you all with some tips, but again, it's more about you have to just get in there and you have to read and see what's going on. Yeah, and I know that can be frustrating, but that's the skill set you should be developing. Learning requires realization of failure and frustration. Learning requires reflection, discussion. Learning is a continuous improvement cycle or process. Sometimes we have to learn better. And perfect practice makes perfect? No. Perfect practice does make perfect. Practice does not make perfect. So here are some of the reasons, the following are 7 common pitfalls to watch out for in your own thinking as a researcher. Confusing what must logically be true to what seems to be true in the world as we know it, a potential pitfall in deductive reasoning. Number 2, making generalizations about members of a category after having encountered only a strict subset of the category. Looking only for evidence that supports your hypotheses. So look for things that are dissenting opinions or dissenting evidence. Confirming expectations even in the face of contradictory evidence. Mistaking dogma for fact. Number 6, letting emotion override logic and objectivity. And number 7, mistaking correlation for causation. So these are all things that you probably read and were like, it's interesting, but it's going to be coming, these things are going to be coming more to the forefront as you narrow your research, your overall topic into a question that could actually be studied. There's evaluating research problems. So this is in chapter 2. I recommend you use this to kind of as a guide or as basis. And no matter where you start or end up in this literature review, narrowing of your, to your research question, make sure you're documenting everything. The decisions you make, the assumptions you have, and as they change, try to track all that. That's why we use the tables to track what we're finding, but you should also be documenting your journey to a research question. Other things here, state the research problem, state the problem clearly and completely. Think through the feasibility of the project that the problem implies. So I think that's been an issue some of you have already run into because I've read it on the discussion board. Say precisely as you mean, and state the problem in a way that reflects an open mind about the solution. And then you, of course, have to keep improving it. So let's look at some scoring. Maybe this will help some of you perform better. So every Monday morning, before I start grading things, I track, document all my classes, all my students, their time and touches, and other aspects through Canvas. So after week 1, the average touches for the class was 194, median is 163. Here's the max and min. So the max is really high. Average time, 6.4 hours, median is 5.1. Max is really, really high. Min is very, very low. Again, it's a small sample. We have, I think we started with 22 students. We've had 2 drop, so we have 20 left. It's only 2 weeks worth of data. So there isn't enough data to really trend or forecast or anything like that right now, even though I'm going to attempt it here in a few moments. And that's another thing you want to think about with your research. Do I have am I allotting enough time for the phenomenon I'm trying to study to occur, or for the treatment that I'm going to control in an experiment for it to reach its full maturity? It's just something to think about. So sometimes time is also an issue, or access to subjects. For module discussions, the average posts are 9, median is 9, max is 18, min is 1, but that includes the icebreaker. So this is sort of an anomaly. Average post score for the discussion board was 88.5, median was 90, max was 100, minimum 7. Not too bad, but then again, I don't count zeros. If somebody gets a 0, I don't count it, just because it skews the results. My expert tip is something I already brought up. Try to visit earlier in the week. Now, one thing I did is after week 1, that was a random assignment for groups. I tracked who participated earlier in the week, and I moved that group, those individuals, into their own group. And they're highly active. I didn't post the numbers here, but they are posting probably 3 times the amount that the other 2 groups are. And as I keep monitoring, I may shuffle it into just 2 groups of 10. The ones who participate earlier in the week are really active, and those who kind of wait and aren't really getting as much out of it. But that's your choice. If you're concerned that you're not getting enough, that your group isn't posting enough, let me know. I'll slip you into that earlier group. If in the earlier group I find that someone is not as active, I'll move them out. That's what I do. For weeks 2 and 3, I use the same setup for groups, but I'll adjust it for week 4. Quiz average for week 1 was 9.4, median was 10. The average time was about 13 minutes. Not too bad. I think I'm allotting 10 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Or I'm sorry, 20 minutes. And the assignment, the average score is about 95, median is 93. And I did post the answer key if you want to see what it is. The whole point of the first week's assignment is to encourage you to use the citation management software. There's a Zotero or EndNote, because then you never have to do that again. I assume it was a painful and time-consuming process, and so you now have the ability to automatically generate your bibliography in APA format. So that's why I do it, so you can see how much it is not fun. From now on, I'll be posting this stuff as a table instead of what I just did. So comparing to the last time I taught this class, your quiz scores are higher. Your discussion board is a little bit lower, but pretty much right in line with what they had done. The assignment, you guys did better. The time for the course, you guys are down quite a bit, but there may be an outlier in here as well. 46, yeah. So there was someone who had clocked 46. So that's where that came from. For the views, your second week was 142. Oh, yours was 182. There, so we've got more people on. 377 is lower than that, so that's even more impressive. Their lowest. Oh, your lowest is 60. Theirs was 36. So we had a straggler here. Obviously, that was dragging some things down. As far as the participation, I didn't report it, but this is the post for week 2. And then here is the week 2 grades after I completed everything. And the grades, yours is a little bit higher but we do have one person that is lower, and that's because they didn't turn anything in week one, and so that's where they are. So that's a comparison of some of the scores from the last time I taught the class. I think we had more students in that class too. For quiz 1, none of the questions incurred less than 90% correct. For week 2, we had a couple. The average score was 89%. You can see the average time was 13.5. Here were the 2 questions that had less than, I do it by 80%, had less than 80%. So one of them was the primary purpose of completing a thorough literature review as part of a research study is to become an expert in the area of interest. Yes, you consume as much as possible. So you completely understand, because you've collected it, documented it, summarized it, what is currently known about that area, and then you're proposing to study an aspect of it. And so you gain the justification for why it's important, and there should be stats or data that defines why it's important. And then once you've completed sort of the background review, then you can state the context and scope of your research question, which is the sort of the environmental or setting in which it's going to be done, and then the scope is the depth in which you're going to focus this question, and then your study objectives should be sort of sub-problems that can be answered through the collection of data and statistical analysis. Okay? So it's the literature review is the biggest part, and some people think that research is a literature review. Well, there is an area of research in which you are just trying to take in all of everything that's been published, and you're going to try to present a new view based on newer research versus later research. And so, sure, there are comprehensive reviews, but for the most part, most studies will do a literature review of what is known leading up to, I want to study this. I want to collect data or experiment or survey people, or do observations with like a rubric or something. That's a majority of the research that's out there, because a literature review is part of every single one of them. Again, it helps you define the problem, come up with the sub-problems, define the justification, context, and scope. The other question that had below 80 was this one, and the best way to organize a review of literature is thematically, with the emphasis on how the literature relates to your question. So almost everything that I tried to give you from chapter 1 of what you should be doing, or chapter 2 rather, it's answered right here. That's what this is all about. You don't just off the top of your head say, oh, here's my research question. You got to get in there and do some searches and review the literature and see what is known, document what is known, and sort of take your path or your journey to what the question will be. I try to help some of you by shortening that, just giving you some of the insights based on my experience and what I've read. But for the most part, you just need to go through it. So I ran a little study here. And so my hypothesis is, does Canvas time reviews influence course grade? Now again, this is very early in the process and we have a very small sample. So that's why I chose the Pearson correlation, because I've got the current grade and then the scores and things you guys did leading up to where that grade is. And sure, there is some, I'm grading it, but I'm trying to use a rubric so that it's even with everybody. But nothing's perfect, right? And so I pulled this Pearson correlation significance table from a website. So I chose a two-tailed, which makes it more difficult to get a significant number. So I'm giving myself the least possible chance or opportunity to get significance here. Small sample, short time frame, two-tailed, which means I'm not assuming it's one side or the other. I'm letting the data tell me. So I ran Pearson with quiz score, average for 2 weeks, discussion score for 2 weeks, assignment grade for 2 weeks, time, and average. And this is against what the grade percentage was. Of course, the quiz, discussion, and assignment would be highly significant. Why? Because they are the things that define the grade. So they're part of it. One thing that's interesting is it seems that the people who score higher on discussion, or participating more in the discussion board, tend to be having the overall higher grade. given that it's only a third of it, it means that those tend to be more active students. And I could have isolated those students, compared to others, but again, it's small sample, small time frame. So what I really focused on were the time and the view, because that's the question. Time and view relate to the course grade. And what I found is that for time, no, it's 0.214, the Pearson correlation number. And compared to the chart here, it's below the 0.1. So it's non-significant. With the view, though, we got a 0.448, which does make it significant with p less than 0.05, which is a 1 in 20 chance of having a type A or type B error. And that's acceptable. We consider that that's interesting. And so I graphed it as well so you can see what it looks like. And you can see there are two outliers in here. And it's a small sample, so an outlier can actually steer something off of being significant. And so these are the two ways that I try to present my results. So my hypotheses, one was true for views because I had the 0.05. The other was false for time because it was non-significant. So one thing I'd ask you is, what are the independent and dependent variables? It's pretty simple. The outcome, which is the dependent, would be the grade. The independent, those of which we try to, in a way, control, but it's what is done, would be the independent variables. They are meant to be the predictors. So they're done earlier in time, even though they are somewhat simultaneous. I did decide to remove one outlier just to show what happens. So I removed the low score. So this was the student who didn't turn in anything in week 1. Are they, affecting the overall statistical analysis? So the Pearson correlation number went from 0.214 to 0.237. Didn't increase it much. How about for views? It went from a 0.448 to a 0.496. So it didn't even change the significance level. So I would probably report, if I was writing this up as a paper, I would report both, but indicate that, under the toughest circumstances, even with probably 2 major outliers, and I probably would remove that one too, but again, we're even shrinking the sample more and it's small, but one outlier can remove it. But in research, what they should do is show you both with it and without it, and then kind of make the determination of conclusions based on that. So in the week 2, you guys had chapters 3 and 4, I believe. And it really focused on the review of literature, and that's where, I was asking you all to try Zotero and EndNote. Most students prefer Zotero. You guys were actually adding it to Microsoft Word. So when you're typing, you can do an in-text citation, and then it'll generate the bibliography in APA format for you. Literature review must be used to provide support, justification for your question. It's as simple but as difficult as that. The more you use the library, citation management software, and attempt to better understand your question, the easier it gets. It does. As long as you're tracking what you're reading and collecting. That's the most important thing. You should, in a continuous improvement process, you are saying, here it is, this is where I want to go, do these things, and I should get there. But if I don't get there, why not? And that's so you kind of change your plan as you go. And that's really, that's research. There's some trial and error going on until you have a strong hold of what is known and what can be pursued. Other tips, start with a topic, plan to refine and narrow. That's what you guys have been doing, but I know some of you have been getting frustrated. I've been trying to provide you with a nudge because I don't want to take away the learning experience of trial and error that comes with literature review. Identify foundational peer-reviewed studies that provide the most comprehensive body of knowledge of your topic to question. I've read that some of you are actually utilizing or ordering books. Be careful. Anybody who writes a textbook should have actual published peer-reviewed papers that cover what they would cover in a book. And if they don't, that's kind of questionable because you want to, be guided by the experts. You want to stand on their shoulders. And if all they're doing is writing books go through an editorial process, but not necessarily a peer-reviewed process. Some do. Like some of the books published by ASSP. I've got a few right behind me. They go through a peer review process, but I don't think the books that come through the National Safety Council do. I've reviewed books before, and I provide feedback, and I don't necessarily see them taking my comments into account. And then there's periodicals that may seem like they're reliable journals, but they're actually periodicals. Like ASSP's Professional Safety Journal, it's not really a journal. It doesn't have an impact factor, and it doesn't have peer review. It has an editorial review board, but they're not scientists. So it's not really scientific work. I can provide you, I think in this class I provided a study I had done using that publication just to show the difference between people who are trained to be scientists and researchers versus those who are just practitioners or professionals. And it was very significant, the type and amount, quantity, number, frequency of more credible citations for the trained people versus the not. And some other things too. Something I did many, many years ago. So going back to here, so make sure you are becoming proficient and comfortable with using the UW library. Reach out to our librarian, Rebecca, for her assistance. She's amazing. Those of you who have already met with her know this. You should be able to narrow to a particular database and search criteria that seem to be working for you. You tweak it once in a while just to see, or maybe use an off-brand, or maybe a search engine that has like a wider search, and see if the papers you've selected as sort of your foundation for your support come up there too. It's just kind of it's extra evidence that you've chosen the right ones. Make sure you're planning and tracking your search. That's what I think some of you aren't doing, is that you're just going in and reading stuff and like, oh, I didn't get my answer. But it's the journey. It's how did you get here? What did you find when you got there? Is this useful based on what your original plans were? Again, you're trying to understand a problem, and then you're trying to define what is known about that problem, and then you're selecting just a brushstroke, an aspect of it on which to propose a study. Fourth is this going to take time? Oh yeah, it takes time, but the more you document and understand the process, the more proficient you get, and then the easier it is. The reason some researchers are cranking out papers all the time is that they have a complete research agenda. So they've done all the searches, they've added their work to it, and now they're adding to that. And maybe also reviewing what other people are doing in the field. They become the experts. Then they write a book, and then they speak. So yeah, that's really how it goes. Talk about your findings and experience to the discussion board. Some of you are ahead of others. Especially that one group that's really active. They are ahead of others that are kind of trailing. Let's see what else. Start thinking about variables to be measured. So I think after week 4, we really focus on types of research studies, and that then will help you start thinking about the methodologies. But as you're reading what other people are doing, take note of the type of research design or study design they employed. It may be something that you replicate, or maybe it gives you the answer that I don't want to use this study design. I want to use something else. Let's see what else here. Oh, this week it was assigned, but it's not due for another week, is do the human subjects protection training. And there are 2 modules you need to do. And I think all the instructions are pretty straightforward. And I think I provided a contact number too, should you have an issue. One of your classmates has already completed it. What they told me is they had a slow day at work, and so they were able to go in and kind of work on it throughout the day. They said that completing the whole thing, going in and out, back and forth, took about almost 8 hours, but they believed that if they could just sit down and do it in one fell swoop, they would take 3 to 4 hours. And that's what I've heard from other students too in previous semesters. So make sure you are allotting enough time to get this done. It's important. So here's what I want you to upload, and I try to block out their name and contact information. But you're doing the responsible conduct of research and the human subjects research modules. These 2. Looks like there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 separate quizzes you have to complete, or training sections for the responsible conduct of research. This is the basic course. And then this other one over here, which is, again, human subjects research, social, behavioral, educational sciences, all researchers. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 modules. And so you take a quiz. I want these sheets because I can see what the scores are, because that's what we use to show that you all have received ethics training. I've received ethics training before, and human subjects preparation for research dominates it all. Really covers a lot more of what you need to know. Here's more information on narrative research. I'm not sure which. I may have just found this online. Do reach out to me. Again, I've been so busy, and that's why I apologize. I'm trying to answer through email and discussion board. Join me on my office hours on Sundays at 8 a.m. Central or 8 p.m. Central. I get on there. If nobody shows up within the first 15, 20 minutes, then I turn it off. But this last Sunday, so after week 2, I had quite a few people come on by. And it's for all my online classes. So there may be a line, but just be patient. And then we can talk about it. And again, what I'm trying to do is just try to nudge you away from things that will take you more time. But I'm not trying to give you the actual answer. I'm not telling you what to use as your topic or your research question. That's something you have to determine, because you need to have the literary support in order to make those statements. Some things you can do is start with an idea, an observation, or a question. And in previous semesters, we had some pretty wild, interesting, innovative questions. And it's with students that they have like a mental block. And so I start with something they're passionate about, and we kind of go down a pathway, and I tell, okay, review these things, get into this area, use something like these search terms, and they come back a week later. This is what I found, so this is what I want to do. I'm like, all right, I may have 1 or 2 other questions, but it gets down to they're defining it, not me. I'm just trying to help them out. The published literature is the guide. I don't know how many times, one more times that I can say this or the book can say this, but make sure you define what is known, and make sure you are tracking your work, your journey. Mark your path is what I say here. So let's do a quick exercise. This is longer than I typically. This is only usually like a 6 or 7 minute video, but covering 2 weeks and some other stuff. So somebody had proposed, I don't know if it was this time or previous class, that their research question is selecting the appropriate gloves for sheet metal cutting. I mean, right there you're like, oh, that's a good research. No, that's just a question. That's a question that can be answered. There's a process by which you assess what you need for what level of cut resistance, and then you have the workers try on the gloves, and those are the ones you select. That's not research. That's just answering a problem based on a process that's already been established. So start over. So another person said they're interested in falls in construction. And I think there's, it's pretty well understood by anybody who's practiced in safety for very long or looked at any statistics that it's the second cause of workplace fatality. It's about half the rate in which workers die from vehicular accidents, but in construction, it's number 1. It's also the number 1 most cited standard. But again, there are more construction inspections than there are general industry, so not really a fair comparison. The costs involved with falls. I mean, another thing is it's not going down at the same rate as, say, musculoskeletal injuries. Those are gone down a lot. Even though they're still number 1 for non-fatal, they've gone down a lot more than others. So what we've been doing to mitigate the risks of musculoskeletal disorders, it's working. I'm not sure which technique is better, but they tend to be working. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I spent a lot of time there reading about it. But falls, still an issue. If I really was going to research this, I would probably, after reviewing the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the NIOSH numbers, I would spend some time with CPWR. They've got a lot of research. That's the Center for Protection of Workers' Rights. They focus on construction. I think they're funded through one of the major unions, or multiple unions, I think, and maybe a little bit of the government. But then in the search engines through UW Whitewater's library, I would try to then select papers that are up to date, especially if I'm going to focus on the U.S. stats. They've got it there, and they'll be referencing CPWR, NIOSH, and Bureau of Labor Statistics. So start understanding where the major issues lie. What type of work are they doing that there's maybe more injuries or fatalities or whatever it might be. So you got to search to understand what factors contribute. When you find a sub-question that is answered, just move on. You cross it off or modify it and keep looking. One that I came up with, let's say that you read a paper that demonstrated that rebar tying has a higher fall with severity with severe injuries. So this is what they represent for the amount of work, but they represent this much more of the injuries. So they're overrepresented in fall-related severe injuries or hospitalizations. So the question is, why are rebar workers falling and not using personal fall arrest systems? That should do it. Or are they being injured when those personal fall arrest systems activate? What's going on? Is it the equipment? Is it lack of training? Is it lack of compliance with rules? Is it lack of supervision? Or are traditional personal fall arrest systems not a practical, aren't practical for certain type of rebar work? So you see, I'm asking questions and I'm narrowing it, but I would let the published work that I'm finding help define that. And sometimes either in the introduction or the conclusions discussion of a paper, they will pontificate beyond what they've collected and attempted to understand. And that's gold. That's where you may find that's the best place, I think, to find out where to continue your search. At least in my experience, the research that I've done, that tends to be where I look. And then as you search the databases, find and inquire, again, document what you're learning, what you're figuring out. Were you able to answer a sub-question or sub-problem? Move to the next, and why? Or have you modified it? The biggest thing is your research question comes from the effort. It's got to be supported. It's got to be justified by the work that you've collected. And you're all new researchers, so I'm not expecting to be perfect, but in pursuing as best perfected, that's not the word I wanted, the effort you put in to pursue a research question that has not been answered, you're building the skills and abilities to search, acquire, review, summarize, compare and contrast peer-reviewed research literature. And that's the whole point of this course, that you experience that. It makes you a more stoic problem solver, makes you a better writer. I know some of you already kind of said, I hate writing, but just start with something small. That's what I did. Write for 5 to 10 minutes a day. Do a search and write it up. What'd you find? That's the best way to do it. And then share it, and then have other people review it. And that's how I became a better writer. Started with 10 minutes a day. That's it. Forced myself. And then I went to 15, then I went to 20, then I went to 30, and then I was actually writing research proposals. That's how I did it. Of course, this was over several years. So it takes more time than 8 weeks. But again, this is a master's degree. It's not a PhD. Please contact me or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can check out my YouTube channel. I've got a lot of videos there. Email me if you have questions. I'd be happy, to help you out. Sundays, 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. Or on Wednesdays, I'm on campus. Just during the day, having office hours, you can call me in my office number or send me an email and we can set up a time to meet. I think I just have a reoccurring meeting with one student at 10 a.m. Central in my office. Just for the next couple weeks, it's going to be difficult for me to meet outside of those two assigned times. But once I get through my Regional Operations Committee meeting in Omaha next week and complete the work I need to as the coordinator for the master's degree, that should all get done within the next 2 weeks, and then I'll have a lot more time. So I will do that. That's all I had for this week. These will be much shorter in the future. But again, get active on the discussion board. That's where I'd like to see where things are. That's where I can help you in more, regular time, because I do try to check it several times a day. Otherwise, again, you guys are doing a great job. This is very difficult. Otherwise, everybody would do it. And this course is also very rigid and set to the traditional way of teaching research methods, which a lot of other master's degrees program, they don't know what they're doing because they don't have traditionally trained PhDs or scientists on their department faculty or department boards. So you guys are getting the real thing. So just keep at it.